The air in the Grand Astoria ballroom, usually thick with the joyous scent of roses and champagne, now felt heavy, charged with an unspoken tension that pricked at my senses. It was David's wedding day, a milestone I had anticipated with a bittersweet mix of pride and apprehension. Pride for my son, who was finally embarking on his own family journey, and apprehension due to his fiancée, Sarah. Eleanor, my late wife, had always possessed a keen intuition, and her subtle unease about Sarah, her ambition, her veiled criticisms of my modest lifestyle, her almost possessive grip on David had been a quiet whisper in my own heart. As I stood near the periphery of the reception, observing the carefully orchestrated tableau of David and Sarah at the head table, their faces beaming under the spotlights, I felt a familiar pang of exclusion. Sarah, radiating a flawless, almost manufactured beauty, had made it clear that certain guests, including myself, were not on her preferred list of attendees for the more intimate pre-wedding events. Today, however, was the main event, the culmination of their union, and I had secured a place, albeit a less prominent one. I'd chosen a tasteful navy suit, a subtle nod to respecting the formality of the occasion, and had brought a small antique locket containing Eleanor's photograph, a silent companion for a day I wished she could have shared. David, my son, the boy whose scraped knees I had soothed, whose dreams I had quietly championed, seemed distant. His smiles were polite, but lacked the genuine warmth I knew so well. His gaze constantly flicked towards Sarah, as if seeking her silent approval for every gesture, every word. The conversation had turned to the wedding favors, small, elegantly crafted boxers that Sarah had insisted upon despite their considerable cost. "They are exquisite, dear," I'd remarked, genuinely meaning it, admiring the delicate calligraphy, though perhaps a bit extravagant, considering the overall budget. My comment, intended as a simple observation, was met by Sarah's sharp intake of breath, her smile tightening infinitesimally. She whispered something to David, her hand resting possessively on his arm. He looked at me, his expression suddenly strained, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Annoyance? Shame? Then Sarah spoke, her voice carrying clearly, cutting through the ambient noise of the reception with deliberate precision. "Mother," she said, her tone dangerously sweet, "David and I have everything under control. Perhaps your input is not needed on every detail. David, perhaps you should escort Mother to the exit. She seems agitated." The words struck me like a physical blow. Escort me out. Agitated. I, Theodore Vance, a guest at my own son's wedding, was being dismissed, unceremoniously removed, like an unwanted guest. The ballroom, moments before a vibrant tableau of celebration, suddenly felt like a stage for my public humiliation. David, without a word of protest, rose from his seat, his movements stiff, his face a mask of awkward compliance. He approached me, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Mother," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "Sarah feels. You're upsetting the atmosphere. Perhaps it's best if you leave now." The coldness in his tone, the utter lack of defense, the complete capitulation to Sarah's demand was more devastating than any shouted accusation. I stood there, stunned, the locket in my pocket suddenly feeling like a dead weight. The man who had asked me about my finances on Mother's Day, the son I had supported, was now publicly casting me aside for his bride. The memory of Emily's childhood, a tapestry woven with my efforts to provide stability and opportunity, a conscious attempt to compensate for Eleanor's absence, now felt like a poignant counterpoint to the present reality. Emily's expensive art classes, her brief, unsuccessful foray into gallery representation, the small apartment I had rented for her when her initial business ventures faltered, each expenditure was a testament to my belief in her, my desire to see her succeed, to find fulfillment. I had always encouraged her artistic pursuits, even when they seemed impractical, believing that passion would eventually lead to prosperity. I had delayed upgrading my own car, foregone numerous vacations, and carefully managed my investments, all with the unspoken understanding that Emily's future was a priority. Eleanor, my late wife, had always been the more cautious one, her gentle warnings often lost in my own optimistic nature. "Theodore," she would whisper, her voice frail but firm, "Emily has a good heart, but she is easily swayed by appearances. Ensure her inheritance is managed wisely, for her own good. And do not forget your own needs, my love. You deserve peace, too." Her words, intended as loving counsel, now felt like a prescient warning. I had managed Eleanor's estate with meticulous care, ensuring Emily's inheritance was substantial, a sum meant to provide security and freedom. I had believed this security would foster her independence and appreciation, not breed a sense of entitlement that led her to discard the very person who had helped shape her life. The foundation of my sacrifice was built on love and trust. But looking back, I saw how easily it could be eroded by the corrosive influence of sudden, unearned wealth, or perhaps by a pre-existing character flaw I had been too blind to see. I recalled her frequently asking about my financial plans, her curiosity about my retirement accounts, and her subtle suggestions that I might consider consolidating my assets for her benefit should anything happen to me. I had dismissed these as filial concern, failing to recognize the calculating undertones. The stark reality was that my love, my financial support, my very presence in her life, had been calculated not for genuine affection but for strategic gain. This realization was a bitter, crushing weight. The sacrifices I had made, the opportunities I had deferred, all for a daughter who now seemed to view me as a financial obligation rather than a father. The wedding, meant to be the pinnacle of this shared vision, had become its undoing. The stark reality was that my love, my financial support, my very presence in her life, had been calculated not for genuine affection but for strategic gain. This realization was a bitter, crushing weight. The casualness with which David had delivered Sarah's loaded question, the subtle implication that she was the provider and I was the recipient of her magnanimity, struck a raw nerve. It was a betrayal of the fundamental truth of our relationship. I was the father, the provider, the one who had sacrificed for his upbringing and his future to have my role inverted, to be positioned as a dependent receiving charity from my daughter-in-law, was a profound insult. I replayed Sarah's pronouncements in my mind, her insistence on managing their finances, her subtle criticisms of my own spending habits, her constant reminders of the sacrifices she and David were making to maintain their lifestyle, all while I was footing the bill. I had always been a giving person, perhaps too giving, too eager to smooth the path for my son. But this was different. This was manipulation, a deliberate dismantling of my paternal standing, a subtle erosion of my worth in my own son's eyes. The phrase "money she generously sends" echoed with a sickening irony. It was my money, Eleanor's legacy, being doled out by Sarah with an air of condescension. The awakening was not a gentle dawn, but a harsh, blinding flash of truth. I saw the pattern. Sarah's control over David's finances, her veiled control over his perception of me, her deliberate efforts to position herself as the sole arbiter of my well-being, my silence, my willingness to go along with their narrative to maintain familial peace, had enabled this. But something snapped in that moment. A breaking point reached not through anger, but through a quiet, resolute clarity. I realized that my continued silence would validate their manipulation, that my willingness to accept their condescending framing of my own contributions was a betrayal of myself. My reply would not be one of hurt or accusation, but of truth, delivered with a calm certainty that would cut through their carefully constructed facade. The phone felt heavy in my hand, but my grip was firm. The game had changed. Their attempt to redefine my role, to diminish my value, would be met not with a plea for understanding, but with a statement of fact that would dismantle their entire narrative. This was not about asking if I liked the money. It was about asserting the reality of where that money originated, and the true nature of the relationship they were trying to redefine. My reply, when it came, was quiet but carried the weight of years of unspoken sacrifices and dawning realizations. "David," I began, my voice steady, calm, a tone that surprised even me. "Sarah's generosity is appreciated, as is your reminder. However, it is important for both of you to remember the source of that money. It originates not from Sarah's efforts, but from the savings Eleanor and I painstakingly accumulated over a lifetime of honest work. It is my inheritance, intended to support my family, yes, but also to provide for my own security. Your mother and I made sacrifices, ensuring you had opportunities. Sarah's management of these funds, while perhaps efficient for you both, does not change the origin of that wealth." I paused, letting the words sink in, observing David's reaction. His casual, almost rehearsed question had been met not with my usual placid acceptance, but with a quiet assertion of fact. "And to answer your question directly, David, I liked the money when it was a reflection of my ability to provide for my family out of love. I do not like it when it is used as a tool for manipulation or as a means to make me feel indebted or insignificant." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, a stark contrast to the usual flurry of excuses or deflections I expected. David did not immediately respond. I could hear a faint shuffling, perhaps Sarah whispering in his ear, the sound muffled but audible. Then, after a prolonged pause, his tone shifted. The hesitant, almost jovial tone was gone, replaced by a clipped, defensive edge. "Look, Dad, I do not know what you are trying to say. Sarah is just trying to help us manage things. It is all for the best." The evasion was patent. The attempt to dismiss my words as mere incomprehensible ramblings was clear. He was avoiding the substance, clinging to the convenient narrative Sarah had spun. Sarah's voice, sharp and cutting, cut in. "Theodore, David is right. You are getting emotional. Perhaps the stress of your own finances is getting to you. We are simply trying to be responsible with what is available." Her attempt to pathologize my response, to label my clarity as emotional instability, was a classic tactic. I felt a surge of anger, but I contained it, channeling it into a more forceful, direct statement. "This is not about emotion, David. This is about truth. And if you cannot see the truth of my words, if you cannot recognize the reality of your mother's sacrifices and the manipulative nature of your wife's actions, then perhaps it is time we reassess the definition of family and generosity in our lives." I hung up before they could respond, the click of the disconnection a small but significant victory. They had underestimated me, had mistaken my quiet love and consistent support for weakness. My reply, spoken not with raised voice but with unshakable conviction, had not only changed David's tone but had irrevocably altered the dynamic between us. The foundation of their manipulation had been shaken, not by anger, but by the simple, undeniable force of truth. The immediate aftermath of that phone call was a strange mix of trepidation and exhilaration. David's attempt to deflect and Sarah's attempt to gaslight me had been met not with my usual placid acceptance, but with a quiet assertion of fact and a firm boundary. They had underestimated my capacity to see through their carefully constructed facade, mistaking my years of quiet support for inherent dependence. My reply, spoken with a calm I had not realized I possessed, had not only changed David's tone but had irrevocably altered the dynamic between us. They had tried to reframe my sacrifices as their generosity, to position me as a recipient of their kindness rather than a foundational supporter, by stating the truth plainly that my actions were born of love and past obligations, not current dependence on their fabricated generosity. I had refused to play their game. The silence that followed my words, the immediate defensiveness in David's voice, and Sarah's attempt to pathologize my clarity as emotional instability, were all confirmations that I had struck a nerve. They had expected tears, perhaps pleading, or at least a confused acquiescence. Instead, they received a quiet assertion of reality. This was my first refusal, not a physical rejection, but a powerful verbal boundary set. It was the moment I stopped being a passive participant in their narrative and began to reclaim my own voice. The victory was small in the grand scheme of things, but monumental for my own awakening. It was the first step in dismantling the illusion they had so carefully crafted, the first refusal to be defined by their terms. I knew this wouldn't magically solve all our problems, but it had established a crucial truth. I was no longer willing to be manipulated or devalued. The power dynamic had shifted, however subtly. The quiet assertion of my perspective had, indeed, changed his tone completely, replacing his practiced charm with a defensive, almost resentful edge. It was a small victory, but it was mine, a reclaiming of my own narrative and my own worth. This moment marked the end of my acquiescence and the beginning of my conscious effort to redefine our relationship, or perhaps to accept its true nature. The refusal was not an act of aggression, but an act of self-preservation, a declaration that my contributions and my feelings held value, regardless of their attempts to diminish them. I understood that this confrontation, however small, was a necessary step. It was the first time I had actively pushed back against Clara's manipulative tactics and David's passive complicity. It was the start of me taking back control of my own emotional landscape. The sterile, impersonal environment of Mr. Davies' law office offered a stark contrast to the emotional chaos churning within me. The air was cool, smelling faintly of leather-bound books and polished wood. A world away from the suffocating atmosphere of Arthur Jr.'s apartment, or the deceptive warmth of Clara's manufactured kindness. Mr. Davies, a man whose professional demeanor was tempered by a quiet understanding of human failings, listened to my account with a focused intensity. My voice, initially trembling as I recounted the phone call with Arthur Jr., had steadied as I presented the facts. The years of financial support, the blatant inversion of roles, Clara's manipulative framing, and my own quiet but firm refusal to accept their narrative. He examined the information with meticulous care, his brow furrowing as he noted the pattern of dependency in financial requests that had become so pronounced. His questions were precise, cutting through the fog of my emotional distress with the cold logic of legal procedure. "Theodore," he began, his voice grave, "your daughter and her husband's behavior suggests a significant pattern of financial dependence and perhaps exploitation. Your willingness to support them, while commendable, has unfortunately created a dynamic where they may perceive you as a perpetual resource, rather than a parent whose support is based on love and prior obligation." His inquiries focused on the specifics of the financial arrangements, the amount of money transferred, the frequency. Any documentation of these transactions, and crucially, any communication that might indicate the nature of these transfers, were they loans, gifts, or something else entirely. We need to understand the full extent of your financial commitments and how they have impacted your own resources, he explained. This will be important not only for any potential legal action, but also for assessing your current financial standing and planning your future security. His counsel, though devoid of personal sympathy, was profoundly grounding. It offered a path, a structured approach to dealing with the overwhelming devastation, a way to channel my confusion and anger into tangible action. He confirmed my suspicion that Clara, particularly, seemed to be the driving force behind the financial strategy, using Arthur Jr. as a conduit for her demands. He advised me to meticulously document all past and present financial assistance, to gather any correspondence that highlighted the nature of these transfers, and to prepare for the possibility that our relationship might need to be redefined, perhaps with stricter boundaries. He was my first ally outside of the immediate, though tainted, family circle, a professional force of order in the face of utter chaos. A stark reminder that justice, though often slow, was a tangible possibility, and that understanding the truth of the situation was the first step towards reclaiming my own agency. He stressed the importance of gathering any and all financial records related to my support of Arthur Jr. and Clara, as this documentation would be crucial in any legal proceedings. He suggested we explore the possibility of proving Clara's direct involvement and manipulation, perhaps through phone records or corroborated witness accounts, to build a stronger case against her undue influence. The days that followed my consultation with Mr. Davies were a blur of legal paperwork and a gnawing, pervasive emptiness. The Mother's Day incident had left me profoundly unsettled, questioning not just Arthur Jr.'s judgment, but Clara's influence and the true nature of their gratitude. The comfortable home I had shared with Eleanor, once a sanctuary of peace, now felt like a place I needed to protect from further emotional and financial drain, its silence amplifying my isolation. I found myself replaying Arthur Jr.'s evasive tone, Clara's manipulative words, and my own quiet yet firm retort. The realization that my love and support had been exploited was a bitter pill, but it was also a catalyst for a burgeoning sense of self-respect. It was during one of my solitary walks, a need to escape the suffocating atmosphere of my own thoughts and the weight of this newfound awareness, that I found myself at Mrs. Gable's doorstep. She was a neighbor, a woman of quiet observation and unexpected warmth, who had known Eleanor well and had always offered a kind word and a listening ear. Seeing my visible distress, she approached, not with intrusive pity, but with a gentle, knowing presence. "Theodore," she began softly, her eyes reflecting a deep well of compassion that seemed to see straight through my carefully constructed facade. "You seem troubled. Is everything all right?" Her words, simple and direct, cut through the emotional haze. She did not pry, but she listened as I hesitantly at first, then with a flood of pent-up emotion, recounted the events of Mother's Day, the phone call, the unsettling shift in Arthur Jr.'s demeanor, and Clara's insidious framing of my support. She shared her own experiences, a sister who had, over years, systematically drained her parents' savings through elaborate scams, a nephew who had vanished after a series of fraudulent schemes. "You are not alone in this, Theodore," she said, her hand resting gently on mine, a simple touch that conveyed immense comfort. "It is a special kind of pain when the ones you love most seem to take advantage of your kindness, but you are strong. Arthur Sr. knew that. He saw that strength in you even when you could not see it yourself." Mrs. Gable became my mentor, not just in navigating the practicalities of my changed circumstances, but in the emotional journey of reclaiming my boundaries. She shared stories of her own struggles with entitled family members, how she had learned to set firm limits, to prioritize her own well-being, and to recognize the difference between genuine generosity and exploitation. She introduced me to her circle of friends, women who had faced their own trials of difficult family dynamics, financial strain, and emotional manipulation, but had emerged with resilience, grace, and a shared understanding. They became my unexpected alliance, a community forged in shared experience, offering a lifeline, a reminder that I was not alone and that recovery was possible. Her advice about establishing clear boundaries, about communicating my needs directly, and about the importance of self-respect was invaluable. She also subtly reinforced the idea that my actions, my firm reply, were not an act of rejection but an act of self-preservation. This affirmation was crucial in shifting my perspective from victimhood to empowerment. I began to focus on small, achievable goals, meticulously organizing my financial records, securing my remaining assets with new legal safeguards, and establishing new routines that prioritized my own well-being and my fight for respect within my family. The initial shock had given way to a period of profound grief and isolation, but as I began to take these steps, a sense of agency started to emerge. a realization that even in the face of devastating loss, I had the capacity to heal and to fight. The stark realization that my son, influenced perhaps by his wife, was capable of such calculated manipulation had left me profoundly unsettled, questioning the very foundation of our relationship, the narrative of our filial bond. The house once filled with Arthur Sr.'s comforting presence and the echoes of our shared life now felt like a repository of my own perceived failings, a place where my trust had been so grievously misplaced. The silence was broken only by the phantom echo of Arthur Jr.'s evasive tone, Clara's overly solicitous voice, all now tinged with suspicion. I found myself replaying countless moments from my relationship with Arthur Jr., searching for subtle signs, for hints of this underlying dynamic of dependency and manipulation that had unfolded so insidiously. It was during one of my solitary walks, a need to escape the suffocating atmosphere of my own thoughts and the weight of this newfound awareness, that I found myself reflecting deeply on the nature of unconditional love versus enabling behavior. I had always believed in supporting my son and providing for him, but had I crossed a line, blurring the boundaries between parental support and enabling his dependence? Eleanor's letters, my late wife, often spoke of balance, of ensuring that love did not become a crutch. Her gentle reminders about maintaining my own life, my own pursuits, now resonated with a profound truth. I realized that my focus on Arthur Jr.'s needs had perhaps inadvertently diminished my own sense of self-worth, making me vulnerable to their manipulations. This period of introspection was painful, forcing me to confront my own passivity and my reluctance to set boundaries. But it was also crucial for my awakening. I began to understand that true love for my son did not mean sacrificing my own well-being or enabling his irresponsibility. It meant guiding him towards his own independence, even if it meant confronting him with difficult truths. The isolation I felt was profound, the loss of the idealized relationship with my son, a gaping wound that ached with a constant, dull throb, but the burgeoning sense of self-reliance, the quiet strength unearthed by adversity, began to offer a fragile yet persistent glimmer of hope. Mrs. Gable, in particular, became an invaluable mentor. She shared stories of her own struggles with entitled family members, how she had learned to set firm limits to prioritize her own well-being, and to recognize the difference between genuine generosity and exploitation. She introduced me to her circle of friends, women who had faced similar trials of difficult family dynamics, financial strain, and emotional manipulation, but had emerged with resilience, grace, and a shared understanding. They became my unexpected alliance, a community forged in shared experience, offering a lifeline, a reminder that I was not alone and that recovery was possible. Her advice about establishing clear boundaries, about communicating my needs directly, and about the importance of self-respect was invaluable. She also subtly reinforced the idea that my actions, my firm reply, were not an act of rejection but an act of self-preservation. This affirmation was crucial in shifting my perspective from victimhood to empowerment. I began to focus on small, achievable goals, meticulously organizing my financial records, securing my remaining assets with new legal safeguards, and establishing new routines that prioritized my own well-being and my fight for respect within my family. The Mother's Day phone call had been a watershed moment, a stark confrontation that irrevocably altered the landscape of my relationship with my son, David, and his wife, Sarah. The initial shock and hurt quickly hardened into a resolve to understand the full extent of their manipulative behavior. Sarah's influence over David was becoming increasingly apparent. Her subtle criticisms of my life choices, her veiled suggestions about my financial management, and her insistence on controlling the narrative of our family. Est's interactions painted a clear picture of her intentions. Mr. Davies, my estate lawyer, became my confidant and strategist. I presented him with the details of the phone call, my own notes documenting their financial requests over the years, and the unsettling pattern of their communication, all of which painted a disturbing picture of financial dependence and emotional exploitation. Mr. Davies examined this evidence with a grave expression, recognizing the pattern of undue influence and financial control. "Theodore," he stated, his voice serious, his gaze meeting mine with professional solemnity, "this situation suggests a clear pattern of manipulation. Sarah is attempting to position herself as the financial authority, likely to gain greater control over David's assets and, by extension, your resources. We need to document every instance of this behavior and prepare for the possibility of needing to establish firmer boundaries, legally if necessary." He advised me to meticulously document all past and present financial assistance, any correspondence that highlighted the nature of these transfers, and to be prepared for a potential confrontation where my own financial independence would be challenged. Detective Miller, when consulted about the potential for fraud or coercion, confirmed that such patterns, while difficult to prosecute without more concrete evidence of malice, could certainly be indicative of financial abuse. She advised me to gather any evidence that demonstrated Sarah's direct involvement in managing David's finances and her controlling influence over him. The rising tension stemmed not only from the emotional betrayal, but also from the dawning realization of the potential legal ramifications if Sarah's manipulation escalated. The carefully constructed facade of familial harmony was cracking, revealing the underlying currents of greed and control. David's passive agreement, his inability to stand up to Sarah, only amplified my concern. I began to see my own past willingness to provide as a vulnerability that had been exploited, and the need to protect myself not just financially, but emotionally, became paramount. The subtle insults about my finances and lifestyle, once dismissed as eccentricities, now appeared as calculated tactics to undermine my confidence and assert dominance. Armed with the details of Arthur Jr.'s evasive responses, Clara's manipulative framing, and my own quiet refusal to play their game, I met with Mr. Davies to formulate our defense. He examined the evidence with a grave expression, recognizing the pattern of financial exploitation and emotional manipulation. "Theodore," he stated, his voice serious, his gaze meeting mine with professional solemnity, "this situation suggests a clear pattern of undue influence and financial control. Sarah is attempting to position herself as the financial authority, likely to gain greater control over David's assets and, by extension, your resources. We need to document every instance of this behavior and prepare for the possibility of needing to establish firmer boundaries." Legally, if necessary, our strategy began to solidify around this damning evidence. We would use the financial records, any communication logs highlighting Clara's control, and crucially, witness testimonies from those who had observed the dynamics between Arthur Jr., Clara, and myself. Mr. Davies advised me to gather affidavits from my closest friends and Mrs. Gable, who could attest to my mental competence, my clear decision-making abilities, and the nature of my relationship with Arthur Jr. and Clara prior to the inheritance and subsequent pressure. He also suggested a psychiatric evaluation to officially confirm my mental and emotional stability, a preemptive measure against Clara's potential claims of my incompetence should the situation escalate to legal proceedings. Meanwhile, Mrs. Gable and her bridge club became my steadfast support system. They helped me navigate the emotional toll, offering invaluable counsel and encouraging me to focus on my fight for justice. They reminded me of my own resilience, of the strength Arthur Sr. had always seen in me, and encouraged me to focus on reclaiming my life. I started attending therapy, a suggestion from Mrs. Gable, to process the complex emotions of grief for the son I thought I knew, the simmering anger at the betrayal, and the profound sense of loss that permeated my days. The process was painful, often emotionally taxing, but undeniably cathartic, helping me to reframe the narrative from one of helpless victimhood to one of resilient self-preservation. I began to meticulously document every aspect of my life that had been impacted, not just the financial devastation, but the emotional toll, the social isolation, and the psychological impact of such a profound breach of trust. This preparation wasn't just for a legal battle, it was for my own psychological recovery, a methodical process of reclaiming my narrative and rebuilding my sense of self-worth, piece by painstaking piece. The determination was clear, resonating within me like a battle cry. The truth had to be uncovered, and I was ready to fight. Mr. Davies also initiated legal proceedings to freeze any assets that might be at risk, though recovering the full extent of what had been dissipated would be a long and difficult process. He stressed the importance of presenting Clara's recent actions, the veiled insults, the controlling behavior, the attempts to isolate me as further evidence of her manipulative intent and disregard for any genuine familial connection. He also advised me to prepare my own testimony, focusing on the facts, the timeline, and the emotional impact of their actions, ensuring a clear and coherent presentation of my case. The courtroom was a stark, impersonal space, its austere architecture and hushed atmosphere a world away from the suffocating tension of my recent family interactions. The proceedings felt surreal, a legal battle against my own son and daughter-in-law, individuals whose actions had caused such profound pain. Arthur Jr. and Clara sat across the aisle, their faces impassive, their eyes devoid of any recognition of the father who had sacrificed so much for them. Now flanked by their formidable legal team led by Mr. Sterling, a man renowned for his aggressive courtroom tactics. Sterling, with practiced efficiency, presented their defense, subtly portraying me as an elderly, overly trusting parent, easily manipulated by my own declining years and perhaps influenced by external parties, rather than the capable individual who had been systematically exploited. He highlighted my temporary displacement and financial distress, attempting to frame it as evidence of my inability to manage affairs, rather than the direct consequence of their fraud. Arthur Jr.'s testimony was a rehearsed performance of bewilderment at my supposed paranoia and my attempts to disrupt their family's finances. Clara, in her testimony, adopted the guise of a dutiful daughter-in-law who had merely assisted her husband and father-in-law with managing finances, her words dripping with feigned concern and a subtle accusation of my own failings. Then, it was my turn to take the stand. Facing Arthur Jr. and Clara across the courtroom, their faces impassive, their eyes devoid of any recognition of the father who had raised them, I felt a surge of unwavering resolve. A quiet strength that had been forged in the fires of betrayal, Mr. Davies guided me through my testimony, allowing me to speak directly to the court, to lay bare the truth of the past year, not with anger, but with the quiet, unwavering conviction of truth. I recounted the Mother's Day phone call, the subsequent financial drain, the isolation, and the sheer audacity of their actions. I presented the journal entries detailing Clara's manipulative plans and Arthur Jr.'s complicity. Detective Miller testified about the difficulty in tracing the funds and the evidence gathered pointing to a deliberate scheme. Mrs. Gable provided a powerful character reference for me, highlighting my stability, my resilience, and my unwavering devotion to my family, painting a picture of a loving parent, not a manipulated or mentally unfit individual. My own testimony was the emotional core of the trial. I spoke of my life of Eleanor's wisdom and of the stark contrast between the loving family I cherished and the manipulative dynamic that had taken root. My support for Arthur Jr. was born of love and paternal obligation, I declared, my voice ringing with conviction, but it became a tool for manipulation, a means to exploit my generosity. I will not be defined by their actions or their definitions of my worth. The cross-examination by Mr. Sterling was brutal, an attempt to portray my grief as delusion, my pursuit of financial stability as a desperate, irrational act. But I held firm, my answers clear, my emotions raw but honest, articulating the truth of my experience without wavering. He tried to twist my efforts to protect myself financially into evidence of erratic behavior, but I calmly explained the necessity of securing my remaining assets after discovering the extent of their fraud. The turning point came when Mr. Davies presented the detailed financial records, highlighting the disproportionate sums transferred to Arthur Jr. and Clara versus any genuine needs, and presented testimonies from friends who had observed Clara's controlling behavior and Arthur Jr.'s passive compliance. The judge, Justice Sterling, a woman known for her impartiality and her unwavering dedication to upholding justice, delivered her verdict after a tense period of deliberation that felt like an eternity. She acknowledged the overwhelming evidence presented, my meticulous financial records, the testimonies of Mrs. Gable and my friends, and the clear pattern of Arthur Jr.'s and Clara's financial dependence and manipulative behavior. She highlighted the emotional and financial toll it had taken on me. The evidence strongly suggests a pattern of financial exploitation and emotional manipulation. Justice Sterling stated, her voice firm and resonant. The defendant's actions appear motivated by a sense of entitlement rather than genuine need or familial respect. While the court cannot compel emotional reconciliation, it can uphold financial fairness and accountability. Therefore, while direct recovery of all dissipated funds may be challenging, the court strongly advises Arthur Jr. and Clara to seek independent financial and personal counseling. Furthermore, for the protection of Mr. Theodore Vance, the court orders a formal cease and desist from all financial requests and manipulative communications directed towards him. Any future interactions must be through legal counsel, and Mr. Vance is advised to take all necessary steps to protect his remaining assets and personal well-being. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room, a palpable release of tension. I had one. It wasn't just about regaining the money, though that was a crucial component of justice. It was about vindication. It was about proving that truth, however buried, would ultimately prevail. Arthur Jr. and Clara, their faces ashen, were escorted from the courtroom by bailiffs. Their calculated scheme, so meticulously planned, had unraveled. Exposed by the unwavering commitment to truth and the collective weight of evidence and testimony, justice in this instance had been served not with vengeance, but with the quiet, profound affirmation of what was right and lawful. The verdict marked the end of one harrowing chapter and the beginning of another, the chapter of my own rebuilding, and the difficult, necessary process of confronting the reality of my relationship with my son and his wife. The days following the court's verdict were suffused with a profound sense of quiet victory and a deep, restorative relief that seeped into my very bones. The legal proceedings had been exhausting, emotionally draining, and a stark reminder of the depths to which familial bonds could be corrupted by greed and entitlement. Yet, emerging from it, I felt a clarity I had not experienced in years. The initial shock of Arthur Jr.'s and Clara's betrayal, The subsequent struggle to reclaim my financial independence and my emotional equilibrium had stripped away the illusions I had clung to for so long. My focus now shifted from the past and its painful revelations to the future and its unclaimed possibilities. I made the difficult decision to sell my personal residence, the place that held too many memories of both joy and profound sorrow, a symbol of a life built on trust that had been so ruthlessly broken. The proceeds, carefully managed with Mr. Davies' guidance, allowed me to solidify my financial independence and to make strategic yet decisive moves. The first was to reassert my boundaries with Arthur Jr. and Clara, not with vengeance, but with the unwavering firmness of someone who had learned their lesson. I stopped the monthly allowance, redirecting those funds towards my own well-being and future. I began to re-engage with the world, not as a victim, but as a survivor. My interactions marked by a newfound clarity and a quiet strength. I took Mr. Davies' advice and began attending therapy, a process that helped me to disentangle my own sense of worth from my children's perceived needs. Mrs. Gable and her friends became my steadfast anchors, their shared wisdom and practical advice invaluable. They encouraged me to focus on my own interests, reminding me that my life had value beyond my role as a provider. I started pursuing my long-neglected passions, taking art classes, a creative outlet I had abandoned years ago, and joining a local gardening club, activities that nourished my mind and spirit. The quiet moments spent in my new, more manageable apartment were no longer shadowed by dread or anxiety, but filled with a profound sense of peace and deep contentment. I found solace in the simple act of choosing my own path, of pursuing my own interests, of living a life unburdened by the weight of my sons' and daughter-in-law's manipulations. The house was gone, but in its place, I had found something far more valuable, a renewed sense of self, a testament to my resilience, and a spirit unburdened by the weight of their betrayal. One crisp autumn afternoon, as I sat on my porch swing at my new, more manageable apartment, watching the city lights twinkle below, a view so different from the familiar quiet of my old yard, a profound sense of peace settled over me, deep and unwavering. The apartment was quiet, filled with the gentle hum of a life finally lived on my own terms. The sun warmed my face, and the faint scent of possibility seemed to fill the air. I had faced my deepest fears, confronted betrayal at its most devastating, and emerged not just intact, but stronger, wiser, and more fully myself than I had ever believed possible. Arthur Jr.'s and Clara's actions, born of greed and a profound lack of character, had inadvertently freed me from a life lived in service of their desires, allowing me to finally live a life for myself. The inheritance that had promised so much had instead brought so much pain, but paradoxically, it had led me to the greatest inheritance of all, the profound and unshakable truth of my own self-worth, and the unshakable freedom to live my life. Finally, for myself, I had learned that love cannot be demanded or bought. It must be earned and freely given, and that true security lies not in the possessions or relationships one accumulates, but in the inner strength and resilience one cultivates. My name was not vanished from my life, nor was my sense of purpose. They were mine, in every sense of the word, a testament to a battle fought and won, a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, and a promise of a future finally lived with authenticity and joy. My name is Theodore Vance. I am 71 years old, and after a lifetime of giving, of sacrifice, and of profound betrayal, I have finally learned the invaluable lesson of self-preservation and the unyielding power of fighting for what is rightfully yours. The journey from the shock of discovering my son's and daughter-in-law's manipulation to this quiet liberation had been arduous, marked by deep pain, righteous anger, and a fear I once thought would consume me. But through it all, I discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. Arthur Sr.'s legacy wasn't just in the financial security he provided, but in the lessons of integrity and resilience he embodied, lessons that guided me back to myself. Arthur Jr. and Clara's actions, born of greed and a profound lack of character, had inadvertently freed me from a life lived in service of their desires, allowing me to finally live a life for myself. If my story resonated with you, if you saw a reflection of your own struggles or triumphs, or if it simply moved you, I would be deeply grateful for your support. Your engagement helps me continue to share these narratives of resilience and hope. Please consider leaving a comment below. I am always eager to hear your thoughts. What would you do in my place? How would you reclaim your life after such a devastating betrayal? Your perspectives are invaluable to me. For more stories of courage, the overcoming of adversity, and the quiet triumph of reclaiming one's life and dignity, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. There are many other stories waiting to be told, each one a testament to the enduring power of truth and self-discovery. With heartfelt greetings, and until next time,